The orc woman rode into the valley just as the sun broke over the eastern ridge, casting long shadows across the flowering meadows, and Thomas Marlowe was already awake, tending to the white boxes that stood in neat rows behind his stone cottage like soldiers at attention. He heard the hoofbeats before he saw her, and when he turned, wiping his hands on his canvas apron, he found himself facing a lean figure astride a bay mare, green-skinned and sharp-eyed, with a leather satchel slung across her chest, and the unmistakable bearing of someone who had traveled a long way for a purpose that would not be pleasant. Thomas Marlowe. Her voice carried clearly across the yard, direct and unadorned. That would be me. He straightened, keeping his hands visible and his expression open. You are welcome here. Can I offer you breakfast before we discuss whatever brings you to my door at such an early hour? She dismounted in one fluid motion, and he noticed the small tusks that curved upward from her lower jaw, the pointed ears that caught the morning light, and the way her dark braid fell over one shoulder when she tilted her head to study him. Her build was athletic, a runner's compact strength rather than the brutish mass some humans feared, and her leather vest and trousers were travel-worn but well-maintained. I am Cara Pembrook, collector for the Northern Merchants Guild. She pulled a ledger from her satchel, flipping it open with practiced efficiency. Your father, Gerald Marlowe, contracted to deliver 600 pounds of honey to our warehouse in Milford by the end of last autumn. He delivered nothing. The debt stands at 300 silver marks, plus interest accrued over the winter. Thomas felt the familiar weight settle in his chest, the one that had taken up residence the day they buried his father in the small cemetery on the hill. My father died last September. The fever that swept through the valley took him in 3 days. I know. Her tone did not soften, but something flickered in her amber eyes. That does not erase the debt. The guild has a claim on this property and all its assets until the obligation is satisfied. I understand. He gestured toward the cottage. But truly, have you eaten? The road from Milford is long, and business always goes better on a full stomach. I have eggs from my neighbor's chickens, bread I baked yesterday, and honey from last spring's harvest. It seems appropriate, given the circumstances. She stared at him for a long moment, clearly trying to reconcile his easy hospitality with the gravity of her mission. You do realize I am here to seize your home if you cannot pay. I do realize that, yes, but you still look hungry and I make excellent eggs. He smiled, and it was genuine, reaching his eyes despite everything. Come inside. Let me show you the accounts and we can sort this out properly. Cara followed him into the cottage, her hand resting on the pommel of the short sword at her hip more from habit than expectation of trouble. The interior was clean and simply furnished, with dried herbs hanging from the rafters and jars of honey, lining one shelf in graduated shades of amber and gold. Thomas moved about the small kitchen with the ease of someone who had cooked for himself for months, cracking eggs into an iron skillet and slicing thick pieces of brown bread. My father was an optimist, Thomas said, his back to her as he worked. He believed every year would be better than the last. When the hives struggled in the spring, he took the guild's advance payment anyway, convinced he could make up the difference by autumn. And he could not. No, the summer was too dry. The wildflowers withered and the bees had little to forage. We lost 4 hives to disease, and the remaining colonies barely produced enough to see themselves through the winter. He turned, sliding a plate across the wooden table toward her. But I have 12 hives now, healthy and strong. The valley is in full bloom. If the weather holds, I will have honey enough to clear the debt by harvest. Cara sat, regarding the food with suspicion that gradually faded as hunger won out. She ate with the focused attention of someone who had been traveling since before dawn, and Thomas sat across from her with his own plate, eating in comfortable silence until she finally spoke again. The guild does not extend credit based on promises of future harvests. They sent me to collect payment or claim the property. What if I gave you a reason to trust that I will deliver? He rose and retrieved a thick journal from a shelf, laying it open before her. These are my records. Every hive documented, every extraction noted, yields and losses tracked to the ounce. My father taught me beekeeping before he taught me letters, but I taught myself accounting after he died. Look at the numbers from this spring. She leaned forward, running her finger down the columns of neat script. Her expression remained neutral, but he saw the slight lift of her eyebrow when she reached the recent entries. You tripled your colony count in 6 months. I am good at this work. My father was good at dreaming, but I am good at doing. He tapped the page. If you seize the property now, the guild gets a cottage and some land, maybe worth half the debt if they can find a buyer who knows how to keep bees. If you give me until harvest, they get their full payment plus interest, and they gain a reliable supplier for years to come. That assumes you survive until harvest. That assumes the weather holds. That assumes a dozen things that could go wrong. But she did not close the journal. It does assume those things, but you rode a long way to collect a debt from a dead man. Surely you can spend a few days here to see if I am telling the truth about the hives. He leaned back in his chair, his blue eyes steady on hers. Stay. Inspect the operation. If you judge that I cannot deliver, then take the property with the guild's blessing and my cooperation. If you judge that I can, then return to Milford and tell them their investment is sound. Cara set down her fork with careful precision. You are either the most honest debtor I have ever met or the most skilled liar. I have found that honesty saves a great deal of effort in the long run. Lies require such elaborate maintenance. His smile returned, warm and slightly self-deprecating. And truly, what do I gain by lying? You hold all the power here. I am simply asking you to look at the evidence before making your judgment. She studied him for a long moment, this human man with his easy manner and his meticulous records, his willingness to feed her before pleading his case. In her 5 years as a collector, she had faced every variety of debtor, the belligerent who threatened violence, the desperate who begged and wept, the slippery who hid assets and played games with contracts. None had ever offered her eggs and an open ledger. 3 days, she said finally. I will inspect your operation for 3 days. If I judge it sound, I will return to the guild with a recommendation for extended terms. If I judge it unsound, you will surrender the property without contest. Agreed. He extended his hand across the table and she shook it, noting the calluses on his palm and the strength in his grip. I will show you everything. You will have full access to the hives, the stores, all records. I have nothing to hide. Everyone has something to hide, Cara said, but without heat. Then I suppose you will find my secrets over the next 3 days. Thomas rose and began clearing the plates. Should I show you the hives now, or would you prefer to rest after your journey? Show me the hives. The morning was clear and bright as they walked through the rows of white boxes, each one humming with the low, steady drone of thousands of insects going about their work. Thomas moved among them with unconscious grace, his bare hands gentle as he lifted frames thick with golden comb and clustering bees. He spoke as he worked, explaining the health of each colony, the temperament of the queens, the patterns of foraging that told him which meadows were blooming and which had begun to fade. Cara watched him with the trained eye of someone who had evaluated countless businesses and properties. She noted the quality of the equipment, the organization of the workspace, the way the bees crawled over his fingers without stinging. She noted, too, the way he spoke to them, his voice low and calm, as though they were honored guests rather than livestock. "Your father built this operation?" she asked, watching him carefully replace a frame. "He started it 30 years ago with 2 hives and a dream. I grew up with the sound of bees as my lullaby." Thomas closed the box and moved to the next, smoke from his copper smoker curling lazily in the still air. "He taught me to respect them, to understand that we are partners in this work, not masters. The bees do not work for us. We simply provide them a home, and in return they share their surplus." That sounds like something a poet would say, not a businessman. Perhaps, but it is also true. He glanced at her, and she saw the flicker of grief cross his face before he smoothed it away. "My father was both poet and businessman, though better at the former than the latter. I am trying to balance what he began." They worked through the morning, Thomas showing her the honey house where he extracted and strained and bottled, the storage shed where empty frames and equipment waited for use, the small workshop where he repaired damaged boxes and built new ones during the winter. Cara made notes in a small book she pulled from her vest, her questions sharp and practical, testing his knowledge at every turn. By midday, they returned to the cottage, and Thomas prepared a simple lunch of bread and cheese and early strawberries from the garden patch behind the house. They ate outside, sitting on a wooden bench worn smooth by years of use, and the valley spread before them in a patchwork of green and gold. "How did you come to work for the guild?" Thomas asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Cara looked at him sidelong, surprised by the personal question. "That is not relevant to your debt." "No, but I am curious. You carry yourself like someone who has done harder work than collecting overdue payments." She considered refusing to answer, maintaining the professional distance that had served her well. But something about his open expression, the genuine interest without the wariness she usually encountered, made her relent. "I was a runner for the army, carrying messages between outposts along the northern border, fast and reliable, invisible when I needed to be." She bit into a strawberry, the tart sweetness bursting across her tongue. "When the border wars ended, I needed new work. The guild values the same skills: speed, reliability, the ability to handle difficult situations. You enjoy it, I am good at it. That is not what I asked." Cara turned to face him fully, ready to deflect or dismiss, but found only patient curiosity in his expression. "It is honest work. I enforce contracts that people entered willingly. If they cannot pay, it is because of choices they made, not because of anything I did to them." "That must make it easier," Thomas said softly. "Make what easier? Taking someone's home." The words hung between them, not quite an accusation but close enough that Cara felt her defenses rise. "I have never taken a home from someone who did not owe a legitimate debt. I do not manufacture claims or exploit confusion. Everything I do is legal and justified." "I believe you." And he did. She could see it in his face. But legal and kind are not always the same thing. The world does not reward kindness. It rewards strength and clarity and the willingness to enforce agreements. She heard the edge in her own voice and forced herself to soften it. "If I do not collect, someone else will, someone who may not be as fair. So you are kind by comparison. I am thorough and honest." "That is better than kind." Thomas smiled, that same warm expression that seemed to come to him as naturally as breathing. "I think you are kinder than you pretend. You did not have to give me 3 days. You could have seized the property this morning and been back in Milford by nightfall. I gave you 3 days because it serves the guild's interests to determine if you are a viable long-term supplier. Of course, that is the only reason." His tone was teasing, light, and Cara found herself fighting the urge to smile in return. They spent the afternoon in the apiary again, Thomas demonstrating his extraction process, while Cara observed and questioned. He worked with economical precision, uncapping the frames with a heated knife, spinning them in the centrifuge until honey streamed out in thick ribbons, straining it through cloth to remove the last bits of wax. The air was thick with sweetness, and the low hum of the bees outside provided a constant backdrop to their conversation. "How many pounds can you expect from each hive?" Cara asked, watching the honey level rise in the collection bucket. "It varies. A strong colony in a good year can produce 60 or 70 pounds of surplus. A weak colony or a poor season might give me 20 or none at all." He lifted the bucket and carried it to the bottling station. "Last year, with the drought and the disease, I averaged 15 pounds per hive. This year, if the weather holds, I am projected at 50. That is more than 3 times the yield. The colonies are healthy now. I learned from last year's failures. Better ventilation, more careful monitoring for disease, supplemental feeding when the forage was scarce." He began filling jars with steady, practiced movements. "And the valley is having a good spring. The rains came at the right time, and the wildflowers are exceptional." Cara did the calculations in her head. 12 hives at 50 pounds each, less what the bees needed for themselves, came to roughly 500 pounds of surplus honey. At current market rates, that was more than enough to clear the debt with a comfortable margin. "The numbers are sound," she admitted, "if the weather holds. There is always that condition, yes, but I am not asking the guild to gamble. I am asking them to wait while I deliver what my father promised." He sealed the last jar and turned to face her. "And I am asking you to recommend that they wait. I will make my recommendation based on what I observe over the next 3 days. The numbers are only part of the equation. What is the rest? Whether I trust you to follow through. Whether I believe you will still be here in 3 months, or whether you will vanish in the night and leave the guild with empty hives and broken promises." She met his eyes. "I have seen that before, too. Then I will have to convince you that I am not that kind of man." He did convince her, though not through grand gestures or elaborate arguments. Over the next 2 days, Cara watched Thomas work from dawn until well past dark, tending his bees with patient devotion, repairing equipment, checking and rechecking the health of each colony. She watched him trade honey with neighbors for the things he needed, always weighing the jars carefully to ensure fair measure. She watched him help an elderly woman repair her fence line without being asked, refusing payment beyond a jar of her preserves. On the second evening, they sat outside the cottage as the sun set behind the western hills, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Cara had filled half her notebook with observations and calculations, building the case she would present to the guild. The recommendation was clear: extend the terms, establish a supply contract, gain a reliable source in a region where reliable suppliers were rare. "You will tell them to wait," Thomas said. It was not quite a question. "Yes, the operation is sound. The projections are conservative. You have the skill and the dedication to deliver." She closed the notebook and tucked it away. "The guild will have their payment by harvest. Thank you." The relief in his voice was genuine, unguarded. "I know you did not have to do this. I did what serves the guild's best interests. You should not thank me for doing my job. I think we both know you could have done your job differently." He leaned back against the cottage wall, his face half in shadow. "You could have seized the property and called it a day. Instead, you spent 3 days living in a strange place, evaluating hives, giving me a chance." Cara felt something uncomfortable shift in her chest, an unfamiliar warmth that had nothing to do with the lingering heat of the day. You made a compelling case. The numbers supported your claims. The numbers helped, but you decided to look at the numbers instead of just following the easiest path. He turned his head to look at her directly. You are a better person than you pretend, Cara Pembrook. She wanted to argue, to reassert the professional distance that had served her so well. But the way he said her name, with casual warmth rather than the formal distance most humans used when addressing her, made the words catch in her throat. I should leave at first light, she said instead. The sooner I make my report, the sooner the terms can be formally extended. Of course. I will pack provisions for your journey. He rose, brushing dust from his trousers. And thank you truly. You have given me a chance to honor my father's debt. That matters more than you might realize. That night, Cara lay in the small guest room Thomas had prepared for her, staring at the ceiling beams and trying to quiet the unusual restlessness in her mind. In 3 days, this human man had treated her with more genuine kindness and respect than most people showed her in 3 months. He had not flinched from her appearance, had not made the subtle movements toward weapons that she had learned to expect, had not treated her as a necessary evil to be endured. He had simply treated her as a person. It was dangerous, this warmth she felt toward him. Dangerous and foolish and entirely inappropriate. She was a collector. He was a debtor. The relationship was transactional, temporary, bounded by the clear lines of duty and debt. When she rode away tomorrow, she would probably never see him again. The thought should have been neutral, even relieving. Instead, it sat heavy in her stomach like stone. She rose before dawn, packing her saddlebag by candlelight and checking her mare's tack in the pre-dawn darkness. Thomas was already awake, of course, moving about the kitchen with quiet efficiency. The smell of fresh bread and tea filled the cottage, and when she entered, he gestured to the table where he had laid out a substantial breakfast. You should not have gone to this trouble, Cara said. It is no trouble. Besides, I wanted to give you something to remember the visit by. He poured tea into 2 chipped mugs, the steam rising in lazy curls. Something better than ledgers and debt negotiations. They ate in companionable silence, and when Cara finally rose to leave, Thomas walked her outside to where her mare waited, already saddled and provisioned with a generosity that made her throat tight. The recommendation will be favorable, she said, keeping her voice level and professional. Expect a formal letter from the guild within 2 weeks, outlining the extended terms. I will watch for it. He smiled, and the morning light caught the gold in his brown hair. Safe travels, Cara. May the roads be kind. She mounted, gathering the reins, and told herself to simply leave. To maintain the distance, to preserve the clear boundary between her duty and her private thoughts. But instead, she found herself hesitating, looking down at him from the saddle. You are a strange man, Thomas Marlowe. You treat a debt collector like an honored guest and find optimism in circumstances that would break most people. Perhaps I am strange, but the world has enough bitterness in it. I choose to meet it with whatever warmth I can manage. He stepped back, lifting a hand in farewell. Thank you again. For everything. Cara turned her mare toward the road, but his voice stopped her once more. If you are ever traveling through this valley again, you would be welcome to stop, not as a collector, just as a traveler who might appreciate a meal and a rest. She should have refused, should have maintained the distance. Instead, she found herself nodding. Perhaps, if the road brings me this way. The ride back to Milford took the better part of the day, and Cara spent it alternating between reviewing her notes and replaying conversations in her mind. She had done her job well. The guild would be pleased with the outcome, gaining a reliable supplier instead of a dubious property seizure. It was exactly the kind of solution that had earned her a reputation for competence and judgment. So why did she feel this strange reluctance? This sense that she was leaving something important unfinished? The Guild's headquarters occupied a solid stone building near the center of Milford, and Cara presented her report to Master Horwich, a gray-haired human with 40 years of mercantile experience and a sharp eye for profitable arrangements. He read through her notes with occasional nods, his expression neutral until he reached her final recommendations. You propose a 5-year supply contract with escalating volumes. He looked up from the page. That is unusually generous for a debtor who has already failed to deliver once. The original failure was due to circumstances beyond the son's control. The father overcommitted and then died. Thomas Marlowe has demonstrated both the skill and the dedication to deliver consistently. Cara kept her voice level, professional. The valley has few skilled beekeepers, and the quality of his product is exceptional. Securing him as a regular supplier serves the Guild's long-term interests. You spent 3 days evaluating a debt that should have been resolved in 3 hours. I spent 3 days ensuring that the Guild's decision would be based on complete information rather than expedient assumptions. She met his gaze steadily. If you doubt my judgment, send another collector to verify my assessment. Horwich smiled, the first genuine warmth she had seen from him in months. I do not doubt your judgment, Pembrook. You are one of the best collectors we have, precisely because you take the time to understand the full situation. I am simply noting that you seem particularly invested in this case. I am invested in securing the best outcome for the Guild. Of course. He set down the report and leaned back in his chair. Very well. I will draft the contract extension and the supply agreement. The terms will be sent to Marlowe within the week. Well done. Cara left the office feeling that she should be satisfied. She had successfully resolved a complex situation, protected the Guild's interests, and given a decent man a chance to rebuild. It was exactly the kind of outcome she prided herself on achieving. Yet as she returned to her small apartment above a bakery, she found herself standing at the window, looking east toward the valley she had left that morning, and wondering what Thomas was doing at that moment. Whether he was checking the hives in the evening light, speaking to his bees in that low, gentle voice. Whether he thought of her at all, or whether she was already just another transaction completed, another chapter closed. She forced herself to turn away from the window, to focus on the next assignment waiting in her satchel. But that night, she dreamed of honey-colored sunlight and the steady hum of bees, and woke with an ache in her chest that had no name. 3 weeks passed, and Cara worked through her usual rotation of collections and inspections. She recovered payment from a miller who had been dodging the Guild for 2 months, negotiated a settlement with a leather worker whose partner had embezzled their operating funds, and evaluated a potential new supplier in the eastern districts. It was good work, necessary work, the kind of steady employment that many of her kind could only dream of in human-dominated towns. But she caught herself thinking of the valley at odd moments, remembering the particular quality of light through the cottage windows, the taste of fresh bread and honey, the warmth in Thomas's eyes when he smiled. When Master Horwich called her into his office again, she expected another assignment. Instead, he handed her a sealed letter and a small leather pouch that clinked with the weight of coin. A message arrived from Thomas Marlowe, Horwich said. He has requested that you personally deliver the revised contract and witness his signature. He has also sent advance payment on the first quarter's delivery to demonstrate good faith. He paused, studying her face. I can send another collector if you prefer. You have other assignments waiting. Cara looked at the letter in her hand, at the careful script of her name on the envelope, and felt her heart kick against her ribs like a startled horse. I can handle it, The other assignments can wait a few days. I thought you might say that." Horwich's expression was carefully neutral, but she thought she detected the shadow of a smile. "Take whatever time you need, but Pembrook, be careful. Mixing personal feelings with professional obligations rarely ends well. There are no personal feelings. He is a guild client, and I am maintaining the relationship to ensure continued compliance." The words came automatically, the shield she had learned to raise between herself and complications. Of course, safe travels. Cara read the letter in the privacy of her apartment, sitting on the narrow bed with afternoon light slanting through the window. Thomas's handwriting was clear and precise, the letter brief and formal in its request that she return to finalize the contract details. But at the bottom, below his signature, he had added a postscript: "The bees are thriving. The valley is beautiful. I hope you are well." Such simple words, such a dangerous warmth they kindled in her chest. She left the next morning, telling herself it was simply good business practice to maintain relationships with important suppliers. The journey to the valley was familiar now, and she found herself noting landmarks from her previous trip, anticipating the moment when the road would crest the final hill and the apiary would come into view. Thomas was working among the hives when she arrived, but he looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, and his face split into a grin that made her breath catch. He set down his smoker and walked toward her, and she noticed that he had let his beard grow in, the light brown hair catching the afternoon sun. "Cara, I am glad you came." He reached up to help her dismount, his hand steady on her waist, and she was intensely aware of the warmth of his touch even through her leather vest. "Thank you for making the journey. The Guild takes contract negotiations seriously. Master Horwich sent me to ensure everything is properly documented." She retrieved her saddlebag, focusing on the familiar ritual of dismounting and settling her horse rather than the way her skin still tingled where he had touched her. "Of course. Though I confess I also hoped you might simply want to visit." He led her toward the cottage, and she noticed new improvements since her last trip. An expanded drying rack for herbs, fresh mortar in the stone wall, a small bench positioned to catch the western sun. "The hives are doing even better than I projected. I think you will be pleased with the numbers." They spent the afternoon reviewing the contract terms, and Cara was impressed despite herself by the meticulous records Thomas had maintained. He had documented every extraction, every pound of honey produced, with supporting notes about weather conditions and colony health. The projected yields were conservative but achievable, and he had already begun setting aside product to ensure he could meet the first quarterly delivery. "You have been busy," Cara said, closing the ledger. "I had strong motivation. The contract you secured for me is the difference between struggling and thriving. I wanted to prove that your faith was not misplaced." He poured tea from a pot he had kept warm on the stove. "And I wanted to show you that I keep my promises. I never doubted that you would." The words came out softer than she intended, more personal than professional, and she saw something shift in his expression. "Did you not?" "Because I have thought about you often these past weeks, and I wondered whether you regretted giving me the extension. Whether you lay awake worrying that I would prove you wrong and damage your standing with the Guild. I do not worry about things I cannot control. If you failed to deliver, it would be your failure, not mine. I evaluated the situation accurately and made a sound recommendation." But even as she said it, she knew it was not quite true. She had worried, though not about her standing with the Guild. So practical, so professional. He smiled, and there was something tender in his expression that made her pulse quicken. "You never allow yourself to simply feel things without justifying them as duty. Feelings are a luxury I cannot afford. I am an orc working in a human city, enforcing contracts that often make me the bearer of bad news. If I allowed myself to feel too much, I would not last a season. She took the tea he offered, grateful for something to do with her hands. Distance and professionalism keep me safe. Safe from what? From disappointment, from entanglement, from caring about people who see me as a monster wearing a human's occupation. Thomas set down his cup with deliberate care. I do not see you as a monster. I see you as a woman who does difficult work with integrity and intelligence. I see someone who gave me a chance when she could have taken the easier path. I see someone I have thought about every day since she rode out of this valley. The words hung between them, too honest to dismiss, too dangerous to acknowledge. Cara felt her carefully maintained walls shaking, the distance she relied on suddenly feeling less like protection and more like a prison. Thomas, I am here on guild business. We should not what? Speak honestly to each other. Acknowledge that something exists between us beyond contracts and debt. He leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. I know the world sees boundaries between human and orc, between debtor and collector. But I also know what I feel when you are near, and I do not think I am alone in feeling it. Cara stood abruptly, moving to the window where she could breathe, where she could think without the intensity of his gaze. Even if you are right, even if I felt something in return, it would be foolish to pursue it. I am a collector. You are a client. The guild has rules about fraternization with debtors. I will not be a debtor after the first delivery. The advance payment I sent clears the original obligation. From that point forward, I am simply a supplier. He rose but did not approach her, giving her the space she needed. And even if I were a debtor, even if it complicated things, would that truly be enough to make you ignore what we both know is here? She turned to face him, and the vulnerability in his expression nearly undid her. You are asking me to risk everything I have built. My reputation, my position, the safety I have worked for. For what? For something that may not survive the reality of human prejudice and the complications of my work. I am asking you to risk those things for the possibility of something real, something rare. He took a step closer, then another, until he stood just within arm's reach. I know it is a great deal to ask. I know you have every reason to refuse. But Cara, I have lived my whole life in this valley, and I have never met anyone who makes me feel the way you do. Someone who challenges me and understands me and makes me want to be better than I am. You barely know me. 3 days is not enough to build a foundation for what you are suggesting. Then let us build that foundation. Let me know you better. Stay. He reached out, and she let him take her hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the warmth of his skin against hers. Not as a collector, not as a guild representative, just as Cara here with Thomas, seeing where this path might lead. She should have refused. Should have maintained the boundaries, protected herself, chosen the safe path. But looking into his eyes, feeling the gentle strength of his hand wrapped around hers, she found that the safe path suddenly felt like the wrong one. I can stay 3 days. I have other assignments waiting, but I can give you 3 days. His smile was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. Then let us make the most of them. Those 3 days unfolded with a gentle inevitability that both thrilled and terrified Cara. Thomas showed her the valley as only someone who had lived there all his life could, taking her to hidden meadows where the wildflowers grew thick as carpet, to the clear stream where he collected water for the bees, to the hilltop where his parents were buried, and he could see the whole valley spread below. They talked as they walked, the conversations ranging from the practical details of beekeeping to the larger questions of how they had come to be who they were. Thomas spoke of his father with love and exasperation, of learning to balance dreams with reality, of the loneliness that had settled over him after the fever took the last of his immediate family. Cara found herself sharing things she rarely spoke of, telling him about her years as an army runner, the strange liminal space of being valued for her skills while still being seen as fundamentally other. She told him about the relief of finding work with the guild, where competence mattered more than species, and about the careful distance she had learned to maintain as armor against a world that did not quite trust her. "You should not have to armor yourself just to exist in the world," Thomas said, and there was anger in his voice, though not directed at her. "Perhaps not, but it is the world I have, and I have learned to navigate it. You navigate it brilliantly, but I wish you did not have to." He reached for her hand as they walked, and this time she did not pull away. On the second evening, they sat outside the cottage as the sky deepened from blue to indigo, and Thomas asked the question she had been half expecting, half dreading. "What happens after these 3 days? Do you return to Milford and add me to your list of completed assignments?" Cara was silent for a long moment, watching the first stars emerge above the eastern hills. "I do not know. My life is in Milford. My work takes me all over the territory. I cannot simply abandon everything for the possibility of something that may not survive the reality of distance and duty. I am not asking you to abandon anything, but I am asking you to consider that we might find a way to make this work, if we both wanted enough." He turned to face her, and the firelight from the cottage window caught the angles of his face. "I am tied to this valley, to these bees, to the work I do here, but there are ways to bridge distance if we choose to try. You speak as though it is simple. I speak as though it is worth the complexity." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her pointed ear with such tenderness that her breath caught. "I am falling in love with you, Cara. I know it is too soon. I know it is complicated, but I also know that I do not want to let you ride out of this valley without telling you how I feel." The words should have terrified her. Instead, they settled into her chest like coming home, like finding something she had not known she was searching for. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me. Then let us be terrified together." He leaned forward, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and when she did not, he kissed her with a gentleness that made her heart ache. The kiss was soft and questioning, an offer rather than a demand, and Cara found herself responding with a hunger that surprised her. She reached up, tangling her fingers in his hair, pulling him closer as the kiss deepened into something urgent and honest, and entirely outside her experience of careful distance and professional armor. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers and laughed, the sound breathless and delighted. "Well, that was worth waiting for. You are insufferable." But she was smiling, and her hand was still in his hair, and she could not remember the last time she had felt this alive. They stayed outside until the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, talking and kissing and planning with the reckless optimism of people who had chosen complexity over safety. Cara would return to Milford, complete her current assignments, and request a rotation that brought her through the valley regularly. Thomas would expand the apiary, building the business to a point where he could occasionally afford to travel. They would write letters, find moments to be together, and build something that honored both their responsibilities and their desires. It was not a perfect plan. It was not even a particularly practical one. But it was theirs, and in that moment, that was enough. On the morning of the fourth day, Cara prepared to leave with a heavy heart that was somehow also light with possibility. Thomas packed provisions for her journey with more care than necessary, and she caught him slipping extra items into her saddlebag when he thought she was not looking. "I will write," she promised, checking her mare's girth for the third time to avoid looking at him directly, afraid she would change her mind about leaving if she saw the longing she knew was in his eyes. "I will wait impatiently by the road for the post rider." He moved closer, catching her hand before she could mount. "Thank you, Cara, for taking the chance, for staying, for seeing something in me worth this risk. I should be thanking you. You are the one who insisted on seeing past the armor to what was underneath." She squeezed his hand, memorizing the feel of his fingers interlaced with hers. "I will return as soon as I can, I promise." "I know you will. You keep your promises just as I keep mine." She kissed him once more, quick and hard, then mounted before she could lose her nerve. As she rode up the valley road, she looked back only once, seeing him standing in front of the cottage with his hand raised in farewell. And she carried that image with her all the long miles back to Milford. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm in Cara's life. She worked her assignments with the same competence as always. But now, she arranged her route to bring her through Thomas's Valley every 2 weeks, timing her visits to coincide with his extraction schedule, so she could help with the work while maintaining the pretense of professional oversight. They wrote letters in the intervals between visits, and Cara found herself watching for the post rider with an eagerness that would have embarrassed her a few months ago. Thomas's letters were full of details about the hives and the valley, but also about his thoughts and observations, his hopes for the future, the small moments that made up his days. Reading them, she felt as though she carried a piece of him with her even when they were apart. Her own letters were more guarded at first, but gradually she learned to match his openness, sharing not just the facts of her work but the feelings underneath, the frustrations and small victories that made up her own life. It was strange and uncomfortable and exhilarating, this vulnerability she was allowing him to see. On her third visit back to the valley in the heat of midsummer, Thomas met her at the road before she even reached the cottage, and she knew immediately that something was wrong. His face was drawn with worry, and there was tension in his shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights. "What has happened?" she asked, dismounting quickly. "Late frost last week. Completely unexpected, and it hit the northern meadow where half my colonies were foraging. The cold killed most of the blooming flowers, and the bees are struggling." He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture sharp with frustration. "I am doing everything I can, supplemental feeding, moving hives to other locations, but Cara, I do not know if I can meet the contracted volumes now." She followed him to the apiary, and even from a distance she could hear the difference in the hives. The normally steady hum was agitated, distressed, and when Thomas opened one of the boxes, she saw the frames were far less full than they should have been at this point in the season. "Show me everything. What have you tried? What are the current stores?" They spent hours reviewing the situation, and Cara found herself drawing on half-remembered knowledge from her army days, when she had run messages between agricultural outposts and picked up fragments of information about crop management and resource allocation. Between Thomas's deep knowledge of beekeeping and her practical problem-solving skills, they developed a plan. Aggressive supplemental feeding to keep the colonies alive, moving the strongest hives to forage locations further afield, and reducing the colony count by combining weaker hives with stronger ones to maximize survival and production. It would not be enough to meet the full contracted amount, but it might be enough to meet the minimum threshold. "I need to tell the guild," Thomas said, exhaustion heavy in his voice as they sat outside the cottage well after dark, having worked through dinner and into the night. "I need to inform them of the situation before the delivery deadline. Let me handle the guild." Cara leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steadiness she had come to rely on. "I will explain the circumstances, and negotiate a reduced volume for this quarter with a make-up provision in the next. The frost was not your fault, and the Guild knows that harvests can be unpredictable. But your recommendation secured the contract. If I fail to deliver, it reflects poorly on your judgment. You are not failing. You are managing a crisis with intelligence and dedication. That is exactly the kind of supplier the Guild wants. She turned to look at him in the darkness. And I will not let them punish you for something beyond your control. He caught her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her jaw. What did I do to deserve you? You offered me eggs and honesty when you could have offered excuses and fear. She kissed him, tasting the salt of sweat and the sweetness of honey that seemed to permeate everything in the valley. We will get through this, Thomas, together. They worked through the night, a desperate race against time and nature to save what they could. Cara stayed not 3 days but 7, putting aside her other assignments to help Thomas relocate hives, repair damaged equipment, and monitor the colonies hour by hour. She worked alongside him in the pre-dawn darkness and the late evening cool, her runner's stamina and his beekeeper's skill combining into an efficient partnership. On the 5th night, exhausted and honey-sticky and running on too little sleep, they collapsed together on the bench outside the cottage, and Thomas began to laugh. It was a slightly unhinged sound, edged with fatigue and stress, but genuine nonetheless. What? Cara asked, too tired to even open her eyes. I was just thinking about the day you arrived here, how I offered you breakfast and tried to charm my way out of losing everything. How certain I was that I could handle this on my own if I just worked hard enough and stayed optimistic. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. I was an idiot, I needed help, and I was too proud to admit it. You are still an idiot, but you are my idiot now, so I suppose I am obligated to help you. She squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses and the strength underneath. Besides, I have invested too much time in your success to let a late frost ruin it. Is that the only reason you stayed? To protect your professional investment? Obviously. I certainly did not stay because I love you and cannot bear the thought of you struggling alone. The words came out easier than she expected, the vulnerability less terrifying now that she had practice. Thomas went very still beside her. You have never said it before, not directly, I know, but it is true. I love you, Thomas Marlowe, even though you are a foolish optimist who takes on too much and thinks honey can solve any problem. Honey can solve most problems, he said, but his voice was thick with emotion. And I love you too, Cara Pembrook, even though you are a stubborn pragmatist who pretends she does not have feelings and thinks distance is the same as safety. They sat in the darkness, too tired for anything but the quiet comfort of being together, and Cara thought about how strange life was, how she had come to this valley to collect a debt, and found instead something infinitely more valuable. When she finally returned to Milford with Thomas's revised harvest reports and the explanation of the frost damage, Master Horwich listened to her account with his usual neutral expression. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, studying the papers she had laid before him. You spent 7 days in the valley assisting with crisis management, he said finally. The situation required immediate intervention to salvage the maximum possible harvest and protect the Guild's investment in the contract. Cara kept her voice level, professional, even though her heart was pounding. I see. And this level of intervention is standard procedure for our suppliers. It is appropriate when a valuable contract is at risk due to circumstances beyond the supplier's control. Horwich smiled, the expression both knowing and slightly amused. Pembrook, I have known you for 5 years. You are competent, thorough, and reliably professional. You are also apparently in love with this beekeeper." Cara felt heat rise in her face, but she met his gaze steadily. "My feelings do not compromise my professional judgment. The recommendation stands on its own merits." "I do not doubt that. But I am curious whether you intend to continue this pattern of extended visits and intensive oversight, or whether we should discuss a more permanent arrangement." "I am not sure I understand what you mean." "I mean that the Guild has been considering establishing a permanent regional representative in the Eastern Valleys, someone to manage supplier relationships and handle local collections without the overhead of constant travel from Milford." He leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "The position would come with a small stipend, and the understanding that the representative would maintain a base in the region while reporting to headquarters on a monthly basis. If you were interested, it would allow you to remain close to your beekeeper while still serving the Guild's interests." Cara stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You are offering me a regional posting." "I am offering you a solution to the obvious conflict between your professional duties and your personal attachments. You are too valuable to lose, and I suspect that forcing you to choose between the two would result in losing you eventually anyway." He pushed a document across the desk toward her. "Think about it, but do not take too long. I will need an answer within the month." She took the document, her hands trembling slightly, and read through the terms. The position was everything Horwich had described, a way to maintain her work while building a life in the valley, a bridge between the two worlds she had been trying to balance. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for understanding, for this opportunity. Thank you for continuing to be the kind of collector who solves problems rather than simply enforcing rules. The Guild needs more people like you, Pembrook, in any position you choose to fill." Cara rode back to the valley that same evening, unable to wait even a day to share the news. She found Thomas in the honey house, working by lamplight to bottle the reduced but respectable harvest they had managed to salvage. He looked up at the sound of her footsteps, surprise and delight crossing his face. "You are back sooner than I expected." "Is everything?" She crossed the room in 3 strides and kissed him, pouring all her joy and relief and love into the contact. When she pulled back, he was smiling, bemused and breathless. "I will take that as good news from the Guild." The Guild accepted the revised delivery schedule. "But that is not why I am here." She pulled the document from her vest, smoothing it on the work table. "Master Horwich offered me a regional posting. I would be based here in the Eastern Valleys, managing supplier relationships and handling local collections. I would still report to the Guild, still do the work I am good at, but I could live here. With you, if you want that." Thomas read through the document slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to wonder to something deep and fierce that made her breath catch. "If I want that." "Cara, I have been trying to figure out how to ask you to stay without asking you to give up everything you have built. This is perfect. This is more than I dared to hope for." He caught her face in his hands, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Yes, yes, I want that. I want you here, building a life with me, combining your world and mine. It will not be easy. The valley is small and people may not accept an orc living permanently in their community. There will be challenges and prejudices and moments when we both question whether this was the right choice. And there will also be mornings waking up together, and evenings working side by side, and all the small, beautiful moments that make up a life." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. "I am not afraid of challenges, Cara, not when the reward is you." They talked long into the night, making plans and dreaming possibilities, and when Cara finally slept, curled against Thomas in his narrow bed, she felt a peace she had not known she was searching for. The transition was not seamless. Moving her few possessions from Milford to the valley took less than a day, but establishing herself as a permanent resident took longer. She met with the valley's informal council of elders, presenting her credentials and explaining her role as guild representative. Some were welcoming, seeing the advantage of having direct access to the guild's resources and market connections. Others were wary, and she saw the flicker of fear or distrust in their eyes when they looked at her green skin and small tusks. But Thomas stood beside her at every meeting, his easy warmth and deep roots in the community lending her credibility. And slowly, as summer turned to autumn, and the first harvest under the new contract was delivered on time and above the revised minimums, people began to accept her presence. She helped negotiate better prices for the valley's wool production, connected a struggling potter with buyers in Milford, and quietly resolved a contract dispute that had been festering for months. She did the work she was good at, and gradually, the wariness faded. On a clear day in late autumn, with the leaves turning gold on the hillsides and the bees preparing for winter, Thomas led Cara up to the hilltop where his parents were buried. They stood together looking out over the valley, and he took her hand, his expression nervous and hopeful in equal measure. "I have been thinking about something for a while now, and I need to ask you a question, but first I need to show you something." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle, unwrapping it carefully to reveal a ring of worked silver set with a simple blue stone. Cara felt her heart begin to hammer against her ribs. "This was my mother's engagement ring. My father gave it to her when they were young, before they had anything but each other and dreams of what they might build together." Thomas held the ring up to catch the light, and the stone glowed like captured sky. When he died, he was wearing it on a chain around his neck, having worn it every day since she passed. He told me once that it reminded him of the best decision he ever made. "Thomas, wait. Let me say this before I lose my nerve." He took a breath, his eyes locked on hers. "You came to this valley to collect a debt, and you left me something more valuable than you took. Hope, the possibility of love, the courage to believe I did not have to face the world alone. And I know we have only had a few months together. I know there are people who will say it is too soon or too complicated or too many other things. But Cara, I know what I want, and what I want is a life with you. Building something together, facing whatever comes, finding our way through the complexity and the beauty and the daily miracle of choosing each other." He sank to one knee on the hilltop. The valley spread behind him in autumn glory, and held up the ring with hands that trembled slightly. "Will you marry me? Will you take this ring that represents the best love I have ever known and help me build a love that might be even better? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice when you gave me a chance?" Cara felt tears tracking down her face, hot and unexpected and entirely unstoppable. "Yes, yes, you foolish, wonderful man. I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit as though it had been made for her, the silver warm against her green skin. Then he was standing and she was in his arms, and they were laughing and crying and kissing all at once, and the whole valley seemed to hold its breath in witness to the moment. "I need to tell you something," Cara said when they finally pulled apart enough to breathe. "I was supposed to take this ring weeks ago. Do you remember the night we were fighting the frost, when we were moving hives in the darkness, and you were worried about your hands being too cold to work carefully?" Thomas frowned, thinking back. "You told me to give you anything valuable to hold so I could focus on the bays without worrying about losing something. You gave me this ring. You pulled it from your pocket and pressed it into my hand and told me to keep it safe. I have been carrying it ever since, waiting for the right moment to give it back." She laughed, the sound bright with joy and wonder. I came here to collect a debt, and I left carrying your mother's engagement ring. I just did not realize I was supposed to keep it. You have been carrying my grandmother's ring around for weeks, and you did not tell me. I was waiting for you to ask for it back. I thought you had forgotten about it." She held up her hand, watching the light play across the stone. "It seems we both had the same idea, just on different timelines." Thomas shook his head, his expression full of love and exasperated amusement. "We are going to have a very interesting marriage, you and I." "The best kind," Cara agreed, and kissed him again as the sun set over the valley that was now their home. They married a month later, on a cold morning with frost on the ground and the promise of winter in the air. The ceremony was simple, held in the small clearing beside Thomas's cottage with a handful of valley residents in attendance, and the distant hum of sleeping bees as witness. Cara wore a dress of deep green wool that matched her skin, and Thomas wore his father's good coat with a sprig of dried lavender pinned to the lapel. Master Horwich came from Milford to stand as witness, bringing with him a revised contract that made Thomas one of the guild's preferred suppliers, and Cara's position as regional representative permanent and salaried. It was both wedding gift and pragmatic business arrangement, the kind of gesture that perfectly captured the interweaving of their professional and personal lives. As they spoke their vows, Cara looked at the man who had offered her breakfast and honesty when he could have offered fear or deception, who had seen past her armor to the person underneath, who had chosen complexity and risk for the possibility of love. And she knew, with the certainty that had always guided her best decisions, that she had made the right choice. "I came here to collect a debt," she said, holding his hands as the winter sun broke through the clouds. "But you taught me that some things cannot be calculated in ledgers or settled with contract terms. You gave me a home when I did not know I was searching for one. You gave me a future I never dared to imagine. And now I give you my heart, my loyalty, and my promise to build something lasting with you." Thomas smiled, his eyes bright with tears and joy. "I promise to meet each day with honesty and warmth, to share the burdens and the celebrations, to tend our life together with the same care I give the bees, knowing that the best things grow slowly with patience and attention." He squeezed her hands, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. "I promise to love you exactly as you are, armor and vulnerability, strength and softness, now and always." They sealed the vows with a kiss as the small gathering applauded, and Cara felt something settle deep in her chest, a sense of rightness that had nothing to do with duty or contract, and everything to do with choice and love, and the courage to reach for something rare. The winter that followed was harsh but not unbearable, the cottage warm and the supplies ample, the work manageable between the two of them. Cara traveled occasionally to handle guild business in the surrounding valleys, but she always returned to the cottage and to Thomas, to the life they were building together. Spring came early, and with it came the first major test of their marriage. The valley had survived the winter well, but several farms had lost livestock to a particularly bad storm, and tempers were running high. When Cara had to enforce a contract that required a struggling family to surrender their remaining sheep to cover a debt, she faced open hostility for the first time since establishing herself in the community. She came home exhausted and heartsick, and Thomas found her sitting on the bench outside the cottage, staring at the dormant hives with tears on her face. "I did everything by the rules. I negotiated extensions, I found buyers who would pay fair prices. I gave them every possible chance. But in the end, I had to take their sheep. I had to watch their children cry while I loaded the animals onto the wagon." She looked up at him, her expression raw. "I hate this part of my work. I hate being the person who brings loss and pain. Thomas sat beside her, pulling her against his side. You are not the person who brings pain. You are the person who enforces agreements that people made freely. It is not your fault that they overextended themselves, any more than it was my fault that my father took contracts he could not fulfill. That does not make it easier to witness. No. But it makes it honest. He kissed the top of her head, his arms steady around her. And you did give them chances. You did everything you could to help them find another way. Sometimes there is no good outcome, only the least harmful one. You ever regret it? Being married to someone who does this work? Never. I married a woman who brings integrity to a difficult job, who tries to find solutions instead of simply enforcing rules, who came home heartbroken because she had to hurt people even though it was necessary. That is not something to regret, Cara. That is something to honor. She turned in his arms, burying her face against his neck, and let herself draw strength from his steadiness. This was what they had promised each other: to share the burdens, to offer comfort when the world was harsh, to be the safe place each could return to when duty demanded hard things. As spring deepened into summer, the apiary flourished. Thomas expanded to 15 hives, then 18, the colony strong and productive in the favorable weather. Cara's work for the guild expanded as well, her reputation for fair dealing bringing her more complex cases and larger negotiations. They worked side by side when they could, Cara helping with extractions and bottling, while Thomas occasionally assisted with contract reviews, each bringing their strengths to support the other's work. On a warm evening in late summer, as they sat outside watching the bees return to their hives in the golden light, Thomas reached for Cara's hand with a casualness that spoke of habit and comfort. "I have been thinking about something," he said. "That is usually when you have ideas that involve expanding the apiary or taking on new projects that require me to do mathematics at odd hours. This time it is different," he smiled, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I have been thinking about what comes next. We have built a good life here, better than I imagined, but I wonder if you ever think about what that life might include in the future." Cara turned to look at him fully, seeing the careful hope in his expression. "Are you asking if I want children? I am asking if you have thoughts about it. If it is something that appeals to you or terrifies you or falls somewhere in between." He squeezed her hand. "I would like to have children with you eventually, but only if that is something you want as well." She considered the question seriously, thinking about the life they had built and the ways it might expand. "I think I would like that. Not immediately, but someday, when we are more established, when the apiary is stable enough that we can spare the time and attention." She smiled, feeling the rightness of the idea settle in her chest. "I would like to raise children who know they can be anything they choose, who grow up seeing that love crosses boundaries people think are fixed. Then we will plan for it, when the time is right." He pulled her closer, and they sat together as the sun set, and the valley settled into evening peace. The right time came sooner than they expected. 2 years after their wedding, on a morning thick with summer heat and the drone of bees, Cara woke feeling unsteady and strange. By the time autumn arrived with its cooler air and shortening days, she was undeniably pregnant, her body changing in ways that both fascinated and occasionally annoyed her. Thomas was delighted and terrified in equal measure, reading every book on childbirth and infant care he could borrow from the valley's small library, asking questions of every parent he knew. He built a cradle in the workshop during the long winter evenings, carving it from oak and lining it with wool Cara had traded from a neighboring farm. "You are fussing," Cara said, watching him sand the wood for the 4th time. "I am preparing. There is a difference. You are worried. He set down the sandpaper and came to sit beside her, his hand resting gently on the swell of her belly. "I am worried. I am excited and terrified and wondering if I have any idea what I am doing, but mostly I am grateful that I get to do this with you, that we have built something strong enough to grow in this direction." Their daughter was born in early spring, arriving with the dawn as the bees began to wake from their winter rest. The birth was long and difficult, and Thomas stayed beside Cara through all of it, holding her hand and offering water and speaking encouragement when she was too exhausted to do anything but push and breathe and push again. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and perfect, with Cara's green skin and Thomas's brown eyes, they stared at her in wonder. "She is beautiful," Thomas whispered, awe thick in his voice. "She is loud," Cara said, but she was smiling, exhausted and elated and transformed by the tiny life cradled in her arms. "What should we name her?" They had discussed names during the pregnancy, discarding options that felt too common or too formal, searching for something that honored both their heritages without being weighted with expectation. Now, looking at their daughter's scrunched face and waving fists, Thomas said, "What about Lily? For the flowers that bloom in the valley, for something that is beautiful and strong and grows in good soil." "Lily Marlowe," Cara tested the name, feeling how it fit. "Yes, that is right." Raising Lily transformed their lives in ways both expected and surprising. The work continued around her needs. Thomas tending bees with a baby strapped to his chest, Cara conducting guild negotiations with Lily sleeping in a basket at her feet. The valley's initial wariness about the half-orc child faded as people saw her grow, saw the way Thomas and Cara loved her without reservation, saw that she was simply a baby like any other, needing the same care and offering the same joy. By the time Lily was walking and beginning to talk, the apiary had grown to 25 hives, and Cara had trained 2 assistants to help with the expanding guild work in the region. They built an addition to the cottage, creating more space for their growing family and for the business that sustained them. On Lily's 2nd birthday, they held a celebration in the clearing beside the cottage, inviting the whole valley to share in the occasion. There was honey cake and fresh bread, music from a traveling fiddler who had stopped in the valley for the summer, and children running through the meadows while adults talked and laughed and shared the easy companionship of neighbors who had weathered seasons together. Master Horwich came from Milford, bringing gifts from the guild and news of promotions and opportunities. He pulled Cara aside as the sun began to set, his expression thoughtful. "You have built something remarkable here, Pembrook. The Eastern Valleys are now the guild's most efficiently managed region, with the lowest rate of defaulted contracts and the highest supplier satisfaction. You have proven that enforcement and relationship building are not mutually exclusive." "I had a good teacher," Cara said, nodding toward where Thomas was showing a group of children how to carefully hold a frame of bees, his patience and enthusiasm evident in every gesture. "Perhaps. But you had the wisdom to learn and the courage to try something different. The guild is grateful." Horwich paused, then continued carefully. "We have been considering expanding the regional representative program to other territories. If you were interested in training others to do what you have done here, there would be opportunities for advancement and increased responsibility." Cara looked out at the valley, at the cottage where Thomas was likely putting Lily to bed at this very moment, at the hives that stood sentinel in the meadow, at the life they had built from debt and honey, and the choice to reach for something rare. "I appreciate the offer, but I think I will stay where I am. This is my home now. These are my people. And there is still work to be done here, building relationships and solving problems and raising a daughter who understands that different kinds of people can build different kinds of families. Horwich smiled, unsurprised. I thought you might say that, but the offer stands whenever you might be ready for a new challenge. I have enough challenges, thank you. This life keeps me plenty busy. As the celebration wound down and the guests departed, Cara found Thomas on their usual bench, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. She settled beside him, fitting herself against his side with the easy familiarity of years together. "Lily is asleep," he reported. "Exhausted from all the excitement and honey cake. Good. She will sleep late tomorrow and we can have a quiet morning." Cara took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Master Horwich offered me a promotion, training other regional representatives, expanding the program across the territory." "That sounds like an honor and a great deal of work." "It does," I declined. Thomas turned to look at her, surprise and relief mingling in his expression. "You did?" "I did. Because this is where I want to be, with you, with Lily, with the life we have built together. I do not need advancement or expansion or anything beyond what we have here." She leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the bees settle into their hives for the night. "I came to this valley to collect a debt. I left carrying your mother's engagement ring. And I built a life that is worth more than any contract or collection." "We built it together," Thomas corrected gently. "Every choice, every challenge, every small victory, this is ours, Cara, the best decision we ever made." They sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the valley settle into night around them, and Cara thought about the strange path that had brought her here. From collector to partner, from outsider to community member, from solitary professional to wife and mother. Each step had required courage and trust and the willingness to choose complexity over safety. But sitting here, with Thomas's warmth beside her and the sound of their daughter's breathing drifting through the open window, she knew with absolute certainty that every choice had been the right one. 3 years later, on a morning bright with autumn sunshine, Cara stood in the honey house watching Thomas teach Lily the proper way to harvest honey from a frame. The girl was 5 now, all curiosity and endless questions, her green skin and pointed ears marking her as her mother's daughter, while her easy smile and gentle touch with the bees echoed her father. "Careful," Thomas said, guiding Lily's small hands as she held the uncapping knife. "The bees worked hard to build this comb. We take only what they can spare, always leaving enough for them to survive the winter." "Because we are partners," Lily recited, having heard the lesson a dozen times. "Not masters." "Exactly right." Thomas kissed the top of her head, pride evident in his voice. Cara felt a familiar flutter in her abdomen, the movement of the second child she carried. This pregnancy had been easier than the first, her body knowing what to expect, the fear and uncertainty replaced by confident anticipation. In the spring, Lily would have a brother, and their family would continue to grow and change and evolve. The apiary had grown as well, now 30 hives strong and producing enough honey to supply the guild and sell at markets across 3 territories. Thomas had taken on an apprentice, a young man from a neighboring valley who showed promise and dedication. Cara's assistant, a sharp-eyed human woman named Ellen, had proven capable enough to handle most routine collections, leaving Cara free to focus on the complex negotiations and relationship management that she excelled at. They had built something lasting, something that would outlive them and provide for their children's future. The debt that had brought Cara to this valley was long since paid and forgotten, replaced by bonds of love and partnership and shared purpose. That evening, after Lily was in bed and the day's work was done, Cara and Thomas walked up the hill to where his parents were buried. They came here often, especially on clear evenings when the whole valley was visible below, bringing news and small offerings and the quiet comfort of connection to the past. "Your father would be proud," Cara said, looking out at the thriving apiary in the distance. "You saved what he built and made it stronger. You honored his dream and made it real." "He would be more proud that I found you," Thomas said, his arm around her waist. "That I was smart enough to offer you breakfast instead of excuses. That I built a life with someone who challenges me and supports me and makes every day better than the one before. You are getting sentimental in your old age." "I am 28. That is hardly old." But he was smiling, the expression warm and content. "Though I suppose with 2 children and 30 hives and a business to run, I have earned the right to be sentimental occasionally." Cara leaned against him, feeling the solid comfort of his presence, the warmth that had drawn her from the first moment despite all her defenses. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been? If I had simply seized the property that first day, if you had not offered me breakfast, if either of us had chosen the safe path instead of the complicated one. Sometimes, but only to be grateful that we did not." He turned to face her, his hands gentle on her face. "You came here to collect a debt and you gave me everything instead. A partner, a family, a future I never imagined. That is not something I will ever take for granted. I love you, Thomas Marlowe. Your optimism and your patience and your absolute certainty that honey can solve most problems. I love you too, Cara Marlowe. Your strength and your integrity and your determination to find solutions instead of settling for easy answers." He kissed her, soft and sweet, as the sun set over the valley below. "Thank you for staying, for choosing this life, for building something beautiful with me." They stood together on the hilltop as darkness fell and the stars emerged. 2 people who had found each other across the boundaries of species and profession and expectation. Below them, the valley settled into night, the cottage warm with lamplight, the hives humming with the slow breath of sleeping bees, the life they had built together continuing its steady rhythm. The debt had been collected and paid long ago. But the ring still gleamed on Cara's finger, symbol of a promise kept, and a love that had grown from unlikely beginnings into something rare and lasting. She had come to take something, and had found instead everything she needed: home, family, and a future that stretched before them bright with possibility. In the years that followed, that future unfolded with its share of challenges and triumphs. Their son was born healthy and strong, with Thomas's fair skin and Cara's amber eyes, and they named him Reed for the plants that grew along the valley stream, flexible and resilient. Lily proved to be a natural with the bees, inheriting her father's patience and her mother's analytical mind, while Reed showed early signs of his mother's speed and his father's easy charm. The apiary continued to thrive, becoming known across multiple territories for the quality of its honey and the integrity of its operation. Cara's work for the guild evolved from enforcement to consultation, helping establish best practices for supplier relationships and training new collectors in the art of negotiation and fair dealing. She became, without quite intending to, a symbol of what was possible when competence and character mattered more than species or background. The valley itself changed as well, slowly but steadily. More mixed families settled in the region, drawn by the reputation for tolerance and the economic opportunities that the thriving trade relationships provided. Lily and Reed grew up with playmates of various backgrounds, learning without conscious thought that difference was simply part of the texture of life, rather than something to fear or reject. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas and Cara hosted a celebration that drew people from across the Eastern Territories. The clearing beside the cottage had been expanded to accommodate the crowd. Tables laden with honey cakes and roasted vegetables and fresh bread. Music and laughter filling the air as the sun arced across the summer sky. Master Horwich, now silver-haired and semi-retired but still sharp-eyed and engaged, raised a toast to the couple. 10 years ago, I sent Cara Pembrook to collect a debt from a struggling beekeeper. She came back with a contract and a proposal that changed how the guild does business in the eastern valleys. What she did not tell me at the time was that she had fallen in love with the beekeeper and was planning to upend her entire life for the possibility of happiness. The crowd laughed, and Cara felt her face warm with a combination of pleasure and embarrassment. But she was right to take that risk, Horwich continued. Because in doing so, she proved that the best relationships, whether business or personal, are built on trust and mutual respect rather than simple enforcement of terms. She proved that different kinds of people can build different kinds of families, and that those families can thrive if we have the courage to let them. So I raise my glass to Cara and Thomas Marlowe, to the life they have built, and to the example they set for all of us. The toast was echoed by dozens of voices, and Cara looked around at the gathering with wonder. These people, from multiple species and backgrounds, had come to celebrate a relationship that would have been scandalous or impossible in many places. They had come because they knew Thomas and Cara, had worked with them and traded with them and built community alongside them. Later, as the celebration wound down and the children played in the meadow under the watchful eyes of neighbors, Thomas pulled Cara aside to the bench that had become their refuge, their thinking spot, their place to return to when they needed to remember what mattered most. 10 years, he said, shaking his head. It feels like both forever and no time at all. The best things usually do. Cara leaned against him, watching Lily show Reed how to approach the hive safely, the girl's patience with her younger brother echoing Thomas's teaching style. We have built something good here, something that will outlast us. The apiary, you mean? Or the family? Both. All of it. The relationships, the trust, the example of what is possible when people choose connection over fear. She took his hand, running her thumb over the wedding band he wore. You changed my life, Thomas. You looked at an orc collector who came to take everything you had, and you offered her breakfast and honesty and eventually your heart. That kind of courage is rare. I was not brave. I was desperate and hopeful and probably a little foolish. He smiled, the expression full of affection and memory. But I was also smart enough to recognize something precious when I found it. Smart enough to hold on and not let go, even when the sensible thing would have been to maintain distance and protect myself. We were both smart enough to be foolish together. Cara kissed him, tasting honey and tea and the familiar warmth that had sustained them through a decade of building and growing and learning. And I am grateful every day that we were. As the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that echoed the honey in the storage house, Cara thought about the journey that had brought her here. From solitary collector to beloved wife and mother, from outsider to community pillar, from someone who believed distance was safety to someone who understood that connection was worth any risk. She had come to collect a debt, and she had left carrying Thomas's mother's engagement ring. But more than that, she had left carrying hope for a different kind of future, carrying the possibility that love could cross boundaries people thought were fixed, carrying the courage to build something lasting and beautiful and entirely unexpected. The debt had been paid years ago, cleared and forgotten in the guild's records. But the ring remained, warm against her skin, symbol of a promise that grew deeper and stronger with each passing year. And the life they had built together continued, evolving and expanding, roots growing deep into the valley soil while branches reached toward futures they could only imagine. In the meadow, the bees hummed their evening song, returning to their hives as darkness gathered. In the cottage, lamplight glowed warm and welcoming, promising shelter and comfort and the simple peace of home. And on the bench outside, two people who had found each other across every reasonable boundary sat together in the gathering dusk, their hands clasped and their hearts aligned, grateful for the debt that had brought them together and the love that had grown from that unlikely beginning. The story could have ended differently. The collector could have seized the property. The beekeeper could have failed to deliver. The relationship could have crumbled under the weight of prejudice or practical difficulties. But instead, through courage and choice and the daily practice of choosing each other, they had built something rare. A love that honored difference while building unity, a family that bridged worlds, a legacy that would echo through generations not yet born. As the stars emerged overhead and the valley settled into night around them, Cara and Thomas remained on their bench, neither quite ready to go inside and end the celebration. There was nowhere else they needed to be, nothing else they needed to prove. They had built their life together, brick by brick and choice by choice, and it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. "Come," Thomas said finally, rising and extending his hand. "Let us go inside, check on the children, bank the fire, and rest. Tomorrow will bring new work and new challenges, but tonight we can simply be grateful for what we have." Cara took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet, and together they walked toward the cottage that had become their home. Behind them, the apiary stood quiet in the darkness, 30 hives strong and thriving. Ahead of them, lamplight glowed in the windows, promising warmth and family and all the small comforts of a life well lived. She had come to collect a debt. She had left carrying his mother's engagement ring. And in the years between, she had found something far more valuable than any contract or collection. She had found home, purpose, and a love that would sustain her through all the seasons yet to come. The door closed behind them, shutting out the night and enclosing them in warmth and light. And in the meadow, the bees continued their ancient work, building and storing and preparing for the future, partners in the great work of transformation, turning nectar into gold and solitude into family and debt into lasting love.